This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. The City Museum defies description. Its structure began as a shoe factory in downtown St. Louis, but starting in the 1990s, it became something so much more, a place that today is a sprawling building-sized piece of art, filled with slides and caverns and secrets, and even a school bus on the roof. The work of many people over many years made the City Museum what it is today. But there was one person who saw what this building could be, what it could be made into. That person and creative force was Bob Cassilly.
I use whatever comes along, and that's the stimulus you use to do this stuff. So that's why it's unreproducible, because all the stuff is being built with what's at hand at the moment. So it only exists in time and space when the stars are aligned, just now.
That was the voice of Bob Cassilly as featured in the documentary Concrete Jungle Gym. It premieres this weekend at the St. Louis International Film Festival. As the film shows, Bob Cassilly's life was filled with stars aligning. Until the very end of his life, he was the center of an artistic universe, one that stretched outside the City Museum to a project he was working on when he died called Cementland. Concrete Jungle Gym is a film that's been years in the making. Earlier this week, its creators, Mike Gualdoni and Zach White, sat down with St. Louis on the Air producer Danny Wicentowski. But before becoming filmmakers, these two grew up together here in St. Louis, and the City Museum was a big part of Mike and Zach's childhood. Danny began by asking Mike Gualdoni to describe his earliest impression of the City Museum.
Well, back in middle school, we would do these things where if there weren't a fight in your class, you would go to a field trip. And I remember one of them, we went to the City Museum. And that was the first time I had ever been there. And it is, you go in there and you're like, wow, what is this place? Is this real? Is this like a dream? Especially for a little kid. So yeah, that's what I remember, crawling around in those tunnels and exploring in there. And, you bump your head and you skin your knees, but it's a blast. It's like nothing you've ever seen before.
Zach, how about you?
Yeah, I think the same, what Mike said. I think the first time I went there, I bumped my head, and one of the last times I've been there, I bumped my head, and it almost kind of felt like like I was time traveling. Like I hit my head, almost like the Spider-Man Peter Parker bite. Like you bump your head, and then I'm not saying I bumped my head and it made us do this documentary, but bumping the head and then bumping it again, it reminds you. I thought every city had a city museum.
I've heard worse excuses for making films than head injury, but I take your meaning. Both, just these impressions that you both bring up, it's one of, I think, the delightful contradictions about this place. Mike, like your class you have to behave, keep the rules, be good in class, and then you can go to this building where no rules exist and where you're probably going to hit your head and get hurt. None of the rules in the outside world seem to exist in the same way there. Was that something that you could recognize as a kid?
No way. I mean, you go to school and you do what you need to do, but then every once in a while you go on a super cool field trip, and like City Museum, you go there and you just let loose, and it's just an incredible playground. Like you play on the playground as a kid, but now you're at this more adult themed playground, and it is just this. You never expect to be in a place like this, so you just run wild.
Now, the film that you both created together, Concrete Jungle Gym, I think it has pieces of a lot of the stories of City Museum that people are familiar with. And I think anyone who's been there, anyone who's been interested in how it was made might know parts of this. But so rarely do you see all of it in one place, in a single portrait. A lot of people have tried to tell this story in the past, and I don't think it's ever been done as comprehensively or as close to its subject as it can be when your subject is no longer alive. How did this film project start for both of you, and how did you two become those, I think, who've now told a story that many people have been waiting for a long time?
Well, Zach emailed me in 2021 in the middle of the pandemic, in the middle of that, political climate where it was just kind of like dark days. And he says, we should do something more positive. We've got all this time. We're working at home. Why don't we do this story on City Museum? No one has really done like you said, a comprehensive story retelling how this actually came to be. And I wrote them a letter or an email, sent it off to their marketing people, and they got back to me. They fell for it.
Yeah.
And that's how it all began.
Mike had mentioned he had also sent a letter like 10, 12 years ago, I think. So I guess you could say, maybe going back to hitting our head, we wanted to do it then, and then it seemed like the pandemic was a good opportunity to produce it. We had free time, and it was an exciting time to try and do something creative and positive.
So a couple years back, one of my colleagues, Kayla Drake, she was a producer on St. Louis on the Air, she went to City Museum and tried to talk with some folks just to ask them, what is this place? Can you describe it simply? And they did try.
Different, wild, creative, basically just renovated.
It's kind of one of a kind because there's nothing like it.
All the cool tunnels, the slides, it's so awesome. And you meet new people.
I don't know how to describe it. It's like a dollhouse, and it's unbelievable things.
This is how I usually tell people. I just say it's like a giant jungle gym.
And that was just some voices of visitors at City Museum recorded by St. Louis on the Air producer Kayla Drake a couple of years ago. I wanted to play that for you because, not just because somebody said basically the name of your movie, Concrete, Jungle Gym.
That's good.
But there's something so elemental about the way kids experience this place and the way that this place resists definition. But you have tried to define it, at least in the title of your documentary. So why jungle gym? Why a concrete jungle gym?
It's a good question. I don't know if we did a good job defining. I don't know if we.
That's kind of what we started with, and we never found a better name.
Yeah, I'd heard in interviews that Bob didn't want to describe. I mean, he admitted he did not want to describe it, and I had also heard he didn't really want people filming. That's kind of why the caves are so dark. We're going in there trying to adjust our aperture and turning up the gain and trying to get. That's for the video people, the gain on the camera. But we're trying to adjust everything and go in, and I'm wondering, Is this not supposed to be captured? It's almost like going to this monument or something that you shouldn't be. You should just be experiencing and not be filming it. So sometimes I'm like, did we capture it? But I hope maybe by the combination of the video, the visuals, what you're seeing, and hearing people talk about it and the process it took to make it, you would maybe get an idea of it.
And I also think that we never moved on from that title because wherever you look in Bob's life, he's playing on a concrete jungle gym. He's sculpting stuff. He's building these artworks that are going around the city and around the country. He's doing all these things, sculpting with concrete. So wherever you find him in his life, man, he's playing on concrete.
And so the Bob that we're talking about Bob Cassilly. And in a lot of ways, he is the real subject of this film. He is a mystery. He is a protagonist. He is a heroic kind of creative figure. He is a troubled, complicated, hard to understand force who creates the City Museum out of his artistic vision. But in trying to capture who this guy was and who he did so many things, how did you have to start this journey of figuring out how do we describe a genius in so many ways?
Well, basically, we just started talking to people and we followed the trail. And as we talked to more and more people, this picture began to build of who Bob was. And then as the project started growing and growing, we began to get some footage that some people have never seen before. And that's Bob in his own words, which was just an incredible window into his mind, just this chaotic tornado of creativity. So we put the doc together, but I mean, it really was Bob kind of guiding us with his words, and yeah, just he built it as we built it.
Yeah, I think having somebody, if we could do a documentary where it's just Bob talking, I flirted with that idea of we just hear Bob's story from Bob, because he kind of sometimes would contradict himself, where he would say, I didn't build City Museum for creativity, I did it as a tax shelter. But then you look at what's happening and it's up to the audience to decide, but it's really interesting.
So talk to me about that, because one of the really interesting parts of this film is you talk to the people who worked with him, you talk to people who were close, and a lot of them in describing who this guy was, talked about his speaking style, about how he communicated. How do you describe an indescribable sculpture or something that has never been made before? What was that like to try to get a sense of what it was like to work with this guy and to talk with them?
I think having some of the clips of him talking and him actually kind of mumbling and getting through his thought process, you can see it happening, like it's evident. And then he would come out with this beautiful comparison, and whether he's comparing himself to Mad Max, like Master Blaster, having kind of a split personality, or talking about the idea of a structure and where it should go. And then I found it like, what would it be like to be working with him and being under the stress of trying to move this heavy object that could possibly crush your arm or worse, and having this guy tell you, I like getting explicit directions. Sometimes I like just reading it, okay, you read it, you can't, it's easy to interpret, but to have it be told to you through this kind of stuttering mumble, and that's not to disregard Bob's character. It's just that's how he would speak. So kind of trying to process that, it almost is like the game of telephone. Like he tells you one thing and then you decipher it and do what he told you. And maybe it might come out differently, but that's kind of, I think, what's cool about City Museum.
So in the way that the film shows us Bob and introduces us to him, you make a pretty intentional opening. We actually don't stay in St. Louis very much, but we go to this incredible incident with Michelangelo's Pieta sculpture. And this is one of those, things that someone might have mentioned going to City Museum, but Bob has this incredible moment. Tell me about this incident and why it was so reflective of who he was that you wanted us to know about this pretty early in the film.
So yeah, he's on his honeymoon with his first wife over in Italy, and they go to see the Pieta, Michelangelo's sculpture. And while they're making their way to this sculpture, they hear this sound. And, the crowd that's walking around might not notice how somebody's working on something. Well, Bob is a sculptor himself, so he knows what the sound of a hammer is on marble. So he immediately knows, oh my God, something's happening. So he goes to the direction of the sound and tackles this guy who's destroying this priceless, beautiful piece of art. And he saves the day, basically. And then the rest of the guards swarm and apprehend the guy. But, it's really this unbelievable story that kind of summarizes his whole being as this person who saves priceless things and someone who loves and appreciates art and would do anything to be that person.
That was Mike Gualdoni talking about the new documentary, Concrete Jungle Gym. The film, which premieres this weekend, tells the life story of City Museum creator Bob Cassilly. It was directed by Mike and his childhood friend and fellow filmmaker Zach White. We need to take a quick break, but we'll be back shortly to continue this conversation. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio. Welcome back. I'm Elaine Cha. Let's return to our conversation with filmmakers Mike Gualdoni and Zach White. Their new documentary, Concrete Jungle Gym, tells the life story of Bob Cassilly, the creator of the City Museum. Before the break, Mike and Zach were telling us how Cassilly prevented the destruction of Michelangelo's Pieta in 1972, and how his interest in artistic preservation extended to St. Louis. They spoke earlier this week to St. Louis on the Air producer, Danny Wysentowski. Here's Danny.
Along with that opening of the movie where Bob prevents the destruction of this beautiful piece of artwork, you also take us into St. Louis as a kind of, maybe not artwork, but something that can be destroyed in its built environment, in its buildings. And there's a moment in the 70s or 80s when these buildings are coming down. Why is this important to Bob's life? Like, what was he seeing in the destruction of this other artwork that he couldn't save fully, but he's taking pieces of it and he's starting to hold on to it? Why does he do this?
I think he's looking at St. Louis's built environment. It stands out. It's one of the greatest in the country, and he sees the sculpture, the terracotta, and that's kind of what he specialized in, and he grew up with it. So he sees that at home being demolished and slated for landfills and demolition, and forgotten pieces of history and cast off to be discarded and then forgotten about. So I think Bob took that as a mission and almost a challenge. I'm going to save these pieces and do something with them. I don't think initially he probably thought he would put them in City Museum, but at least save them, kind of like a squirrel or something saving like nuts. Like he just saw these pieces that were valuable to him. And I think at that time, just from our research, not many people agreed, because there was a lot of public thought from interviews and archives that, hey, tear it down. It's an eyesore. This building, it used to be something, but now it's not anymore. Get rid of it. We'll put a parking lot there, or we'll do something else with it. But Bob sees it as this was sculpted by hand. I think one of the interviews we did that was really fascinating was you could see the thumbprints behind the brick when they would take down a facade, and you could see that this was made by hand 100 years before they touched it, and try and preserve it and appreciate it and honor it and give it the respect that Bob thought it deserved.
You know, Bob Cassilly gained a great deal of beautiful pieces of these buildings. You know, the destruction of St. Louis ended up filling, some of the things that are in St. Louis now. Do we know how Bob felt about those demolitions or about what was happening to the city? He was certainly perhaps gaining personally. Was he upset about this?
Yeah, I don't think he liked to see things go to waste. And and there was one of the churches in the city was being demoed.
Yeah, St. Henry's.
St. Henry's, and he was so passionate about this building, he went and brawled with the cops, and that's the level of commitment he had to these beautiful structures, because once they're gone, they're gone, and it's kind of a disrespect to the people who built that and the structure itself to just dispose of it like that.
And I think going to other cities and seeing new buildings being built and things like that, they don't have the artistry and the craftsmanship that these buildings that Bob was looking at. That's almost its own entirely different documentary, another project. But I think, watching a building go demolished, like St. Henry's, it was an old Catholic church, and they had demolished part of it, and there was a steeple still standing, and Bob had gotten word that it was coming down. And there's videotape that we tried to get for the documentary. Sorry, that's not good to say. This is not in our documentary we're promoting, but there's videotape that we heard that is Bob getting arrested. And
wow.
Apparently him and his friend Bruce Jerry, they locked themselves in Bruce's Jeep outside the steeple, and they wouldn't leave until the cops pulled them out, and it got real nasty, and Bob was arrested. We looked into trying to get his mugshot and at the records, and I just think I think he would tell you, though, Bob might tell you, I didn't do that for that reason that you think I did. I did it for this because I just wanted to have a fun afternoon or something. I think he might present, it goes back to how he compared himself to Master Blaster and having two personalities. And one of them might say, I didn't do this for that reason, but I think deep down, of course, there's that appreciation for the art.
So I want to talk about, that metaphor you're referencing is something that Bob Cassilly brings up in some of the clips, and he is reaching for perhaps metaphors to describe his own creative process. There's a part of him that is, manic, and there's a part of him that is trying to find a kind of childhood that he didn't have. And another one, it seems like he has, he just refuses to obey authority. And, his artwork is guiding him toward these conflicts with the city, or, what might happen if I put a bus on top of this without asking anyone for permission. But some of that, there are moments where you're wondering, did Bob make this museum for art? Did he make it for himself in some internal need? Are those two things related? I'm wondering, you've clearly given us different threads in the film to see these parts of him. Did you come to any conclusion or a sense of why he did this? Was this for him?
To me, I feel like he really just had to do it. He wanted this giant place to build, and he managed to get this building for a great price, and he just started going crazy with it. I do think it was for himself, but eventually it just kind of grew from that, and then eventually just let other people play in his world. collecting his friends who collected other things and put in like the room with all the bugs and the taxidermy stuff and all the architecture, and it just is something that he just had to do. It just the public could benefit from it as well.
Yeah, it started out as an aquarium. I think that was the idea initially. And it goes back, I think, to having that split kind of one of him being a kid. I want to play in a building because how else, you get this building and it's beautiful and you can go through and walk around and do whatever you want there. And that's, if you're a kid, that's incredible. Like, go have fun. But then there's probably that adult side that was like, you can't play forever. You have to kind of make something happen. And that's sort of, I think, where we're going to build the aquarium. But there's still that child, okay, we're going to build the caves behind it. And then we're going to turn the spiral shoe chutes where they used to slide shoes down in this century-old building and turn it into a 10-story slide. And we're going to have fun with it and do something different. And so I think there's that need. He's like being driven by multiple voices, and yeah, I don't know if we fully could capture it because it's him, it's who he is, and it's his brain.
So the City Museum building itself, this was a former headquarters, a huge manufacturing facility for the International Shoe Company, these giant metal circular slides that have now become, for children, those used to be for products and things like that. The story of how he gets this building, I'm curious because there's a part of my brain sometimes that thinks he must have planned this out. He must have sat down to the business plan. We buy this building, we install this, and by 20 years from now, we'll be one of the most well-known St. Louis tourist locations. That is just not how this works. How did he come into possession of this building, and was there any plan to turn it into what it is now?
I mean, it was all just kind of serendipity for him. It was just moving to one thing to the other. He had the building that he bought over by the Botanical Gardens, and he sold all the stuff out of it. He rented it out, and then eventually the Botanical Gardens wanted to expand, and this building was just in the perfect spot. So he made a killing on that, selling it to the Botanical Garden, and that's what gave him the funds to be able to purchase the International Shoe Building downtown, which Washington University was selling it for $2 million or so. They were asking that much. Well, the building was just wrecked, and there wasn't a lot of faith in downtown at the time. So he got it for a steal. And so now he's got this big building to play in, and I'm not sure if he entirely knew what he wanted to do with it at the time, but he just started out at the aquarium and just built from there.
It's amazing that detail that Bob essentially was a property developer in a way that I think we could recognize in a pretty traditional, he bought houses for very cheap. He improved them. He did artwork on them, but he found ways to increase their monetary value, which is, beyond a bit the realm of art. He was looking at numbers. He becomes wealthy. He buys this building. Was there a tension that you found in the way that he succeeded in the market of architecture and turning buildings into numbers, but also someone who was an artist and saw those buildings in a very different way? How did those things coexist?
I think when he bought the shoe building, International Shoe Complex, I don't think he saw it as a real estate investment. I think it's one of those situations where you have a little bit of money after you're paid. And maybe this is, I've never had that much money, but I would imagine if you sell one building, you have a profit. What do I do with it? And I think a lot of people would say invest and do this and do that and secure it and make it safe. But it's kind of like one of those things where you have enough money where, well, I'm going to just use this money to go have fun with it and take a little trip for myself or do something fun. And almost like it's just, I don't have it anymore. So if this doesn't work, oh well, the money's spent. So I think he just saw it as, I'll buy this building. And Gail, his second wife at the time, she agreed, and they went into the building and roller skated, as you'll see in the film, and then that's kind of what convinced her, okay, let's do it. And yeah, they did charge rent, like they had tenants, so they had to start making something possible, because you buy that and then you have to start paying, your crew and people who are working on it every day to turn it into what it became. So you're kind of using some of the people living in the offices. I mean, it's a 10-story building. It's so large that you could fit people and do the real estate investment thing on one side of it, and then on the behind the building, you can kind of have fun and have a party in the back. So it really is kind of business in the front and party in the back.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that we get a chance to see that building as it was shortly after it was purchased. We see how dirty it was, the roller skating, and part of what is remarkable about this film is the footage you have from the creation of the City Museum, time lapses, not just Bob himself, but seeing seeing that place empty. Also is just a startling thing. How did you acquire or find the folks who had been filming this and to show a City Museum as a way that I don't think anyone has seen it before?
Well, we had seen some curated clips from this stuff that we ended up getting, and we've been tried to find this man, Mark Silverman, for almost the whole time we were working on this.
Shout out to Mark Silverman.
Yeah, he was huge. He shot all of this stuff while this was happening, and he's got some amazing. He's a great cinematographer. And how did we end up finally getting? I'm having a blank.
Well, we it was kind of like our white whale. We were searching for this footage. We knew that something existed, but we didn't know to the extent of what existed. So we knew there was at least, hey, if we could get 5 to 10 minutes, or just get permission to use what's already been uploaded on YouTube. But we talked with Bob's son Max, who had been working with Mark Silverman, put us in contact, and then Mark, we met and talked about the project. He had 18 to 20, a couple dozen tapes that he shot in the early 90s while they were building, mid-90s while they were building City Museum, up until when it was already finished, and he kept shooting. I mean, he would just go back and shoot, and you can see kind of in the footage on some days, Bob is fine with the camera being up in his face sculpting, and then on some days you can kind of sort of see that there's this like tension in the tape. He's not saying anything, but you can kind of sort of see like, don't disturb me while I'm sculpting and creating this. And to have that window into Bob's world at that time period was incredible. And I really do think the documentary wouldn't be what it is without that footage. So Mark really is an exceptional part of the documentary.
Mike, what was it like when you first saw that footage?
Oh my God! I mean, it's stuff that he used to make like a 30-minute DVD back in the day. But then there's hours and hours of the stuff that nobody has seen for so long.
Environment.
Talk about him and getting a picture of how that world was going on in my mind. But now to actually see it once we got those tapes it was overwhelming. And it was just, like Zach said, it was a great piece to have to try and build this little puzzle we were making.
You know, if we're looking at Bob Cassilly as an artist, as he is, and I think there's a comparison of, like Da Vinci or Michelangelo, someone whose talents and vision seems to be so disparate, so spread out, and each one of them is special. Your film takes us beyond City Museum, and we get to go to the work that Bob Cassilly died trying to complete, which was Cementland, something that made City Museum look small, something that was, again, an expression of something Bob needed to do, but was something also people were dying to see, to enjoy, to explore. What is Cementland in relation to City Museum? Was it an expansion? Was it something new? You got to see also new footage of him working on this. What did you learn about this final life project that he was working on? What did it mean to him?
Well, to me, it was like his whole life was moving from one thing to another, and he finally kind of got bored of City Museum, as awesome as that place was. He's like, I need bigger. I need more space. So he happened to find this property, the world's, at one time, world's largest cement plant. Bought it, and he said, all right, I got this new canvas. Let's go to work. And he just went to town on it.
Yeah, I sometimes draw the comparison that Bob, if he was like a billionaire, he would go to space, or he would do something else like and I would almost say more selfish with it. But I think he had the opportunity, and this was maybe his final frontier, his space, to go to Cementland and build something that goes back to the City Museum. Was it just for him, or would it have been made maybe for other people to enjoy? But it was another play space. It was another place for people to experience positive, an interactive environment. And yeah, I think Bob had that. I don't know if he had that vision when he bought it, but it was 52 acres. It was an abandoned cement plant that he was known for polluting for years in the neighborhood, and kind of, if you were to look at it not through Bob's eye but through someone else's lens, you would think this is a terrible idea. This is why would you do this? It's just an abandoned cement factory. How are you going to convince people to come to this part of town, this kind of forgotten part of town? How would you, as a tourist destination, and it's on the Mississippi River. It has a lot of beautiful things when you start to look and think about it, but the vision was extraordinary.
And he had a lot of big plans. Like, he owned part of the Mississippi River there and a little loading dock that went out onto the water. And he had the plan to ferry people from downtown, from the City Museum, to bring them up to this awesome place. It'd be a restaurant. And they even, somebody talked about they had this old military dredger, and they were going to rig it up to be able to power the whole place. So it was like this off-the-grid awesome apocalyptic playground.
They did some of the people did tell us too, and I don't know if it made it into the full, but there's so many interviews we have. You can only include so much in this documentary because you're kind of just cutting an hour and a half feature film. But you have all these other interviews, and some of the people are saying Bob didn't think he would actually ever open it, and it would just be a place, almost like a commune. And that's me picking that up, interpreting that, but almost like a place for his crew they were going to build places into the mounds that Bob was building and live kind of like their own, like a residential, if you could imagine condominiums or something, but their own place to live on the riverfront.
I did notice that in the film, and I think it raises this really interesting question that as beautiful as a place like the City Museum is and has so many memories, there's a part of me that came away from this film wondering, like, did Bob accidentally make this? But he does talk about Cementland in this way in the documentary. I think he says in some ways, like, half the reason I made this was to not be depressed, or something to that extent. But that crew, that the people who would have lived perhaps with him in Cementland, you got a chance really to talk with these people, why they would be so connected that they might consider living in that kind of community. What did you take from them and the kind of community that was, maybe would have taken hold there if not for his death in an accident there?
Well, a lot of those people they've been working for him for 10 to 20 years or more. And, they were almost a family, and they trusted him. They knew what he was capable of. So they said, maybe at first like skeptical, but they know what he's able to do. So why not jump along and ride on this incredible rocket ship?
Well, I mean, Bob did live on a riverboat, on a barge for a while on the river, and we'd heard, that's not in the documentary, but he kind of had this, before that he lived inside City Museum, so he was kind of living in the tower at the top, and he lived in Lafayette Square, and he had all these great places that he lived in, and it's partially because he built them, so he could live in these places. So I kind of am thinking if I had crossed paths with Bob and I was there, I would love to live. Like, why? That seems like it would be an incredible experience to have this unique place and live somewhere that not only is kind of in an area that you wouldn't expect, but also with this beautiful adorned architecture that he sculpted into it or recrafted a century-old piece of machinery to be a bar or something that only Bob would do.
And that goes to show you what kind of leader and inspiring person he was, to draw these people in and build this community of people that loved and trusted each other. And why wouldn't you go and live in a hill on an abandoned cement plant?
Especially if you work so hard on it, like you put all this effort into it, and you think, okay, well, there's some really great photos that you could see the sculpture and the ground and everything was really starting to come into place, and it was really beautiful and like such a unique looking environment.
That was filmmaker Zach White. He and Mike Gualdoni are the directors of a new documentary about the City Museum creator, Bob Cassilly. We need to take a quick break, but we'll be back shortly to continue this conversation. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio. Welcome back. I'm Elaine Cha. Let's return to our conversation with filmmakers Mike Gualdoni and Zach White. They're the directors of the new documentary, Concrete Jungle Gym. Its subject is the complicated life of artist and city museum creator Bob Cassilly. Before the break, Mike and Zach were describing Bob Cassilly's other major creative work, a place called Cementland. Tragically, in 2011, Cassilly was killed while working there when a bulldozer overturned. Concrete Jungle Gym premieres this weekend, and Mike and Zach sat down earlier this week to talk about it with St. Louis on the Air producer Danny Wysentowski. Here's Danny.
You do address his death in this film. It has been treated in other contexts as sort of a true crime issue. There's questions about what really happened. It was such a abrupt tragedy and something that, even though it was dangerous work, I don't think anybody expected him to end that way. How did you think about approaching Bob's death, talking about what it meant when the loss, the work that has not been done, the fact that Cementland is not going to ever be what he thought it was, it is so great. How did you try to approach the death of someone like Bob Cassilly?
Yeah, we knew since very early on in the production that we would come to this moment where it's like, how do we address this? Because anytime you hear this discussed online, a lot of people are like, well, this is something fishy. There's something going on here, and we decided to just show things as they happened in the moment, and it was, a terrible tragedy that he just rolled his bulldozer down this hill that he was building, this massive hill. And, we've interviewed so many of his friends and family, and we never really heard anything to the contrary. If there was leads, we may have investigated that, but we never really heard or saw any evidence to say this was anything else. We did happen to get some news footage from KMOV that shows some helicopter footage of the accident. And one of the main points people talk about, that I've seen anyway, is that there were no markings along the hill where he would have rolled. If there was a bulldozer that rolled down a hill, there was been scarring all across the land. There's no markings. Well, this footage shows clearly, boom, 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 where this thing fell. I mean, and then right there, it's like, well, yeah, this guy who lived on the edge, we've seen so many countless hours of footage of him walking on a tightrope with no harness, doing all this wild stuff. I mean, this is just how he lived. So it was just this terrible tragedy, and that's just kind of how we went with it.
Yeah, I think to add, that's what we believed as we discussed and interviewed over 30 members of his crew and his family. Nobody directed us towards following this path. And of course, that's the idea that he was murdered. Nobody ever opened up that door, or it never gave us the idea to go pursue it. We just wanted to present the stories of his crew, his family. And if somebody had told us, hey, this is something that is worth looking into, we, of course, my idea of us making a documentary as documentarians, we would follow that path. But nobody ever really, going back as we were observing it, but nobody ever really opened up that door and said, hey, come, this is what we think. Everybody thought it was an accident. As Mike said, he lived on the edge. He was kind of a zany individual. He was known for showing up multiple times throughout his life with cuts and bruises and scrapes, and he was known for kind of having a lot of accidents. And this was just one unfortunate accident that resulted in him passing away.
Am I remembering that you actually had a chance to visit Cementland and film?
Yes. Yeah.
What was it like to be there?
You can still see the work, you can still enjoy it, and it actually makes you more sad that it never was completed. And I think just looking at it is, okay, yeah, what does it look like now? But when you go and walk around there and see how large it is, and how the mounds that Bob built are still carved, he sculpted them into the abandoned cement buildings. So you can look at the buildings and imagine this is what they probably looked like before, just flat. But he had a mound that connected to the top of a building, so you could walk up the mound and go across the building. So you can see like the evidence and the traces of what this great land could have been. And it's really unfortunate and disheartening to know that it was never completed and sits today as I believe they're trying to turn it into like a shipping facility. But just this wonderful park that would have just been absolutely tremendous.
And now it sits like so many ruins around the world that it's just echoes of Bob's beautiful mind and what he wanted to do. And yeah, it is unlike anything else when you walk through there. It's like you're walking through an ancient.
Yeah, I was actually thinking just while you were saying that, it feels kind of like it's this like Mesopotamia or Atlantis. I think one of the ideas we had for a title, an alternate title was called, I was going to say we should call it Babylon, but I don't think Mike liked that too much. But it kind of has this old, like, even though it was made, 13 years ago, the last piece would have been carved, and now it's an unfinished sculpture, but it really does feel like it's like you're stumbling upon like Pompeii or something happened that this was a once great civilization.
That point, I think, brings up a feeling that I really had at the end of this film, where there's this contradiction, is that we have City Museum and even Cementland in its place, but if you are thinking about ancient Babylon, it had its height. You could say when the streets were packed with people and when these buildings were full, and you could see the fullness of this place. We don't have that with Cementland, and we don't have that into such a great extent with what Bob wanted to do. Mm-hmm. It's this imaginary place that if Bob had lived long enough, we could have gone there. Does that place really just exist in imagination? Is City Museum something close to it, this Bob place?
City Museum is certainly close to it. I think I love that comparison, that idea that it's this place that now people could experience, like Babylon in reverse. But I think, yeah, City Museum is probably the closest you'll get, because unfortunately they are removing some of the mounds and flattening the structures that Bob was building. So you can go there, but it would be against the law. It would be trespassing. So you can't enjoy it how it should have been enjoyed. But maybe that's kind of what's romantic about it, is that it's this forbidden place that is kind of like Chernobyl or something. People still go visit those places, but it's kind of just a lost site, like and Bob, I think, has talked about, wouldn't it be kind of more cool and romantic that not everything exists forever? It's you were there at this moment, and now there's the ruins and the leftovers, and you could kind of say the same about other parts of St. Louis as well, places that Bob was saving. So it's really fascinating.
So Mike, let me ask you kind of on that other side. I think there could be a perspective where you could enjoy the City Museum, you could see it for what it is, but the Cassilly crew, the people that he worked with, they've now been working on that for 10 or 15 years. It's owned by a different company. At a certain point, the City Museum will be having managed by non-Bob Cassilly for longer than it was built by Bob. Should we be honest with ourselves that we're never going to get to see what Bob really perhaps wanted to show us, and that you need a lifetime to build what he was trying to build? How do you balance that in yourself?
Well, yeah, it goes back to what Zach said, is that nothing lasts forever, and that's why these beautiful moments should be cherished. But that's where the kind of end of message of the film, it's like, well, part of Bob's legacy is some of the things that he passed on to his crew. And now his crew are building things in their own way and with their own creativity. And that creativity just kind of echoes through society, I feel like, over the ages. So Bob may not be here with us, but his influence is still with us.
That cycle of creativity and destruction and artistic genius and loss, you kind of give us this view of it right at the end of your film, not about Bob and not about City Museum, but following his crew and the work on this other monumental project, a skate park built in a church called Skate Laborious, and the church burns while you are working on this project, and you start watching another set of artists pick up the pieces and figure out, where does our vision take us? What was that like to witness that? Did it feel like a parallel to this story of Bob you were trying to follow.
Man, I tell you, that was a sad day. I was really upset. I mean, upsetting things happen all the time in life. That one was really rough. But in true Cassilly fashion, they're not going to let some setback like that stop them. They're going to keep moving on, and that's kind of part of our end plan with this film, is to maybe do some screenings and help fundraise a little bit to help them get back on their feet, because they still have something there, and they're not going to let this stop them.
Yeah, I think it's like also it's classic Cassilly, but also classic St. Louis. Like, this used to be something else, and now we turned it into this, and then it burned down. But now we're going to turn it into this. And I really think, I mean, who would have thought for decades while the cement factory was churning out, cement to be used across the country to build the highways and build our infrastructure, that it would have one day fall on a despair and then be recycled into a theme, not even a theme park, but an adventure land. And I think the influence of what Bob was doing and with his crew is kind of like wait and see what happens.
Where do you think Bob's legacy goes from here? The City Museum is thriving. It is preserving so much of what he did. It's preserving the St. Louis that was lost and destroyed while he was still building things. After making this film, where do you see his legacy going?
Well, I do see him as kind of definitely a St. Louis maverick who has helped in the city immensely in so many different ways. But now, his crew now kind of carries the torch, and his family who take his wisdom and influence with them, with all the different projects they're doing at Blah Studios, which is a good few of the original Cassilly crews, and they're doing cool, wild stuff all over the city. So it's still happening. It's just different faces.
Yeah, and I think if you were to view Bob kind of as, like, we're talking about these ancient civilizations, like a figure from the past, you get these lessons, like learning from Socrates and Plato, and I don't want to sound like I'm comparing them to that, but you get these lessons, and I think some of Bob's lessons could be applied today with emptying office buildings and things like that after the pandemic. How do we get people to come back to buildings, and what do they mean, and rethinking the purpose and idea of an office building or an old apartment building. Maybe it doesn't have to sit empty. What if we did something creative with it and reused it? What if we turned a church into a skate park? It's kind of that lesson of maybe that will hopefully carry on and make St. Louis and other cities apply it and could make them stand out as truly one of a kind in a unique place.
Do you need someone like Bob? Like, this seems like the sort of thing that no government would sensibly make a place like Cementland.
No, you do need Bob. Yeah, I think you need somebody like Bob, and they're not somebody you can just find on the street with a resume. But I hope that maybe there's somebody who crawled through one of the tunnels at City Museum or slid down a slide, who maybe has been inspired and has yet to do something, but will carry their own idea about something in the future and apply it.
And those people, it's not that they want to do this stuff, it's they have to. So those people will naturally bubble up to the surface and cause a little ruckus.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.